everyone. Right, we're going to be looking at Merthyr Mawr and the coastal hinterland. And I thought what I would do today is obviously look at the new inn, which you can't not do when you look at Merthyr Mawr, which I can technically avoid doing if I'm doing a load of different lectures. So I've got the book in front of me, The Inn of Fear by Alan Morgan. I'm just going to read out the first few words out of this book, actually. And I'm going to build up on that because one of the things about Merthyr Mawr is definitely the story of the new inn. And off the coast of Merthyr Mawr as well, you have this rock known as Scare Rock. And as so described by the Welsh Media Group in 2016, it's a place of many wrecks. So we've got a couple of images looking at Scare Rock, and I just thought I'd bring in a coastal theme because, strangely enough, the coastal theme is directly linked to the theme of the new inn, and the theme is death. You can't have nothing but death when you're looking at Merthyr Mawr, with a rocky coastline where people are finding a great deal of loss of life associated with this coastline. At its height, between 5 and 10 ships wrecked along this coastline every single year. And if you want to say that this part of the coastline off Merthyr Mawr, running all the way down beyond Dunraven and Nash Point, down to St Donat, it's one of the most populated in regards to shipwrecks anywhere in Wales, if not the Great British coast. We don't know how many people lost their lives. And one thing I want to do is we've got to chuck a hanging tree in there now and again. And we've got to chuck a hanging tree in there because this is what makes Amy's day, talking about people being hung. And we'll mention that little bit of a story again associated with Cap Coch and being hung at the gibbet at St. Hilary, the other side of Cowbridge. So we've got to mention that. So that's sort of setting the scene. But to sort of set the scene a little bit more, I would like to mention in passing, in the words of the day, a lunatic asylum, which very few people know about ever existed. And like many things in history, we do find that things are lost in the footnotes. And the very facts about wrecking have been lost in the footnotes. You try and find images of ships which have been wrecked along our coastline on the internet is very difficult. But looking in books, there's plentiful amounts of information about wreckings, hangings, murders, and things that go bump in the night. So when you do go to Merthyr Mawr, you may be excused for mentioning Candlestand Castle. And I may be excused for mentioning Candlestand Castle as well, because in a word, the church at st.hilary at Merthyr Mawr, the sand dunes at Merthyr Mawr, Candlestand Castle at Merthyr Mawr, Merthyr Mawr House, and the new inn, and the wonderful river Ogmore, all come in together like little chapters in a little miniature book that tell this story and that. Now, actually, do you know what? I'm going to tell you my own personal story about this sand dune. Now, lots of people say about these sand dunes at Merthyr Mawr that they are the place where Lawrence of Arabia was filmed in the 1960s. Now, actually, it's half and half on that. I'm not really sure that they ever filmed anything to do with Lawrence of Arabia here at all. But it could be believable. But anyway, back to my little story. I met this woman back in 1995, and we decided to go for a wander up and down the coastline, which was a rather strange expedition. And eventually we ended up from Porthcurry, we ended up all the way getting to Merthyr Mawr, at which point it started raining, and we decided we'd had enough of spending wet nights out together, and we decided to head home. But we actually spent the night in these sand dunes, and it was, mind my French, it was bloody eerie. There were no songs of birds to be heard. There was no wildlife. It was really, really strange. And I can say haunted with a small H, and ghostly without the G. It was that type of landscape. You can put your finger on it, but you always felt as if there was a presence within these sand dunes, and very much within these sand dunes. Very haunted, strange set of sort of humps and bumps, because this very landscape has got one little ghost story that I'm going to tell you about. There was a gentleman. He would look out to sea. And I've never actually told this story with a little sort of load of sand in front of me, and it sort of makes it sort of more plausible. So it's sort of saying that this man was standing by about here. And this gentleman, he's always described as a gentleman, is said to be looking out to sea. And year after year, this gentleman would be seen looking out to sea in the most fairest of weather. So you can assume it was a summer story. I tell you what, let's chuck it in the solstice. So 21st, tomorrow, solstice time, he's looking out to sea. And he's said to be wearing the same clothes. And lo and behold, people started to wonder if this was a real man or a ghost. So after 100 years, the story being told over and over again about this man looking out to sea in the summertime, around the same time of year, smack bang in the middle of summer, as he's looking out at sea, one guy, it said, described the event of contact. Spooky. And he met with this gentleman, and he said, "May I ask you, please, sir, why are you looking out at sea?" And the gentleman replied. He said, "I'm looking out to sea because just in front of where the water is, just in the distance, there's a little mound of sand. And underneath that mound of sand, there's a load of gold buried." And the other man said, "Gold? Why didn't you go and get it?" And the gentleman said, "Well, I'm a ghost. I can't go and dig it up. And if you do dig it up, you are allowed to keep the gold." Now, that's a really strange story, because all the stories, well, not all of them, that's a bit of a sweeping statement. Most of the stories associated with the coastline and gold and silver being found, you usually have to chuck it in some kind of river. And usually the river would dispose of the metals, usually gold or silver, and you'd be given good luck for the rest of your life. I think being given good luck is better than finding a load of gold, to be honest with you. Anyway, long story short, so he said to the gentleman, "When shall I dig this up?" And the gentleman said, "Dig it up tomorrow night. I will watch you." So anyway, he dug up this gold, and he turned to the gentleman. He said, "Am I allowed to really keep this?" And the gentleman said, "Yes, you may keep it. Are you sure now? Are you absolutely sure nothing's going to happen to me?" And the gentleman said, "Yes. And all I want in return is for you to say thank you." And he said, "I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to thank you 100 times over." And as he turned back to look out to the sea and then back to the gentleman was gone. And lo and behold, the gentleman was never ever seen again. And again, it's an unusual story, because the man or lady finding the precious metal wasn't asked to dispose of it. So that's what makes it an unusual story. Anyway, back to the sand dunes again. The fascinating thing about these sand dunes is that on my travels through these years, I've been told that very strange things have been found in these sand dunes. Walls of buildings, walls of walls, and apparently there's a Roman site down there as well somewhere. And in amongst all that sand and stuff, they found lots of Neolithic flints and Mesolithic flints. It takes the sort of landscape back 8,000 years ago. When 8,000 years ago, the River Severn was just a little bit of a trickle. So you can imagine this is a rather interesting landscape. And all the stuff is just humped and moved around with, and so on and so on. The lost village of Kenfig is meant to be under all these sand dunes. And there's one other thing, there's one word of warning about these sand dunes. Never ever try and go across these sand dunes to try to get to the sea if you don't know where you're going, because you will not find it. I have taken several parties of people through those sand dunes, and every single time they have become very lost. And I know Ellen's laughing, but I have lost whole parties of people in these sand dunes, and you never see them again. It's not good for business, folks. So, you know, it's a very, very strange landscape indeed. And I don't know why you're shaking your head, Amy, but I think you've experienced the same. So whenever I've been asked to do a ghost walk on these sand dunes, the answer is no, no, never. I will not do it ever, particularly at night. The other thing as well, hidden in these sand dunes, there was apparently a coin hoard found as well. So get out there with your metal detector, Ellen, and I'll never see you again. But anyway, there's also a shooting range from the Second World War. It's one of those weird sort of Second World War landscapes. And if you look at the old maps, sort of over towards the right there, going towards Porthcawl, there's actually the remains of a windmill type weird, strange structure. And I have no idea what date that is. So, and you're looking out at that calm sea. It's never calm when you're sailing a boat through it. It's a very dangerous coastline, actually, very, very dangerous. And I would put my money on never sort of sailing down this part of the coastline. Now, there's one tragic thing about this building, and what is tragic is the following. Back in about, well, the dates there, it is Candlestand Castle, this is. Just off the sand dunes there. Candlestand Castle, doesn't it look wonderful there back in 2009? They had used about £500,000 worth of taxpayers' money to remove the ivy, do it up a little bit. But unfortunately, in this country, we have a habit of chucking money at things and just leaving it. And now it's all completely overgrown again, and the roots of the ivy is destroying the walls, which is quite tragic. But occasionally, when I'm with some of my students, names shall not be mentioned. We have been down there, and we've accidentally, after we've left, there's less ivy. It's strange that you can't really do that because it's a scheduled ancient monument. But you know, it's strangely removed of the ivy when we leave the place. I'm not going to mention a lady who comes to one of my classes, Kathy, but she's been very useful in helping removing the ivy. I've got into trouble now, I'm sorry. But anyway, Candlestand Castle is a very strange site. It's not a castle, right? I don't want to do too much. I don't want to do too much about Candlestand Castle, a lot to get through. But it was said to have been still standing in the war. Now, when I've investigated this, I think they've been talking about the First World War. It was used as an officer's billet. Officers were stationed here, American officers, in the First World War. But when I've actually been there, when you go upstairs into this part of the building, what you can see in one of the arches is actually American regimental inscriptions in there, and I think there's dates of the 1940s. So I'm thinking that, okay, it may have been reused in the 1940s by American soldiers. However, all the illustrations I've seen at this building from the 1940s show it as not having much of a roof on it. But mind you, they are Americans and they deserve to be put in squalor from the rich lives that they've been used to in America. They're going to war after all. Anyway, oh, I shouldn't have said that. That's terrible. So anyway, one wonderful thing when we do a walk at Merthyr Mawr is we always start near the church. And stone me, I haven't even started on my my new in story yet. That's a bit of a shame. But anyway, when we actually go to this church graveyard, you know, we always get a sense that there's weird things going on there. I can remember that it was the beginning. God, it was the beginning of last year, we had a walk, and there was 6 people on it. and then we got used to having 30 or 40 people on the walks, and things had changed. But when you had just 6 people on it, it was either a disaster because there was no atmosphere, or on this one night, early part of the last year, we had this one chap, and we went to the back of the church, and he said, well, while you were talking, Karl, it was like a guy standing alongside me by where that bush is over there. So we at the back there, we were standing looking at the carved stones and so on. And there was a guy standing behind him, and he said that it just felt really weird. And I said, yeah, of course it bloody feels weird, because it was a ghost. Anyway, as he looked over from the back all the way over to the corner of the church, apparently there was another figure dressed in red. Anyway, we all started thinking, this is very strange night. Oh, and strangely enough, that's where my story about seeing a black shook comes from. It was that very night last year, beginning of last year. Anyway, the weird thing was that when we had left the back of the church to the front of the church, the lights were out inside the church. And the strangest thing was that when we had gone around to the back of the church, the lights were on in the church. The church porch doors were open of the church, and people were able to go in there. Anyway, one of the guys said he was going to check the door, and it was all locked up, and it was just like really weird because the gate that we'd come through hadn't been opened either. Anyway, that was a really eventful night because we felt and saw so many different things. And then as we'd finished the walk, and our cars were actually this side. And the strangest thing was that one of the groups said, "Why is there a man standing in the doorway in like a red sort of top and so on?" And we all looked over. There was a red, and suddenly the person disappeared. It was really, really strange. And I tell you what, either we were all smoking magic mushrooms that night, or the magic mushroom was smoking us. It was a very strange thing indeed. I don't have an image of it, but in the church graveyard, there's a weird glacial stone. It's about 2.5 meters in length by just under a meter wide, and it's got a weird cut in it, right, which is a weird slot. And that stone itself would have been where the holy men would have preached from. What they would have done, they would have taken a piece of the Holy Cross with them, and they would have chucked it into that slot, and that's where they would have preached. Naturally, that's what you do. And I always say that the early signs that you've got an early church is actually one of these sort of semi-carved stones, or a glacial stone, a really old-looking stone. And the stone itself, I haven't described that. It was a glacial erratic. So the stone had come down with one of the glaciations and had been deposited on the landscape. Just a few other things about this church. The church has been completely, demolished in the 1800s, and it was rebuilt. So lots of the wonderful effigy stones that were once inside the church are now outside, and they're really eroded, and you can't really see much detail on them, which is a bit of a shame. But just sort of out the back of my memory, I'm always reminded when we look at this church about the sense of something really ancient within this landscape. There's some old sense of a connection, and you can't really put your finger on it. There's no medieval remains of houses and stuff, and you're thinking, well, there's no Roman remains nearby, and so on. But you always get the feeling from the little things that have been found within the landscape, Roman coins and the old pre-Norman carvings, that there's something really interesting going on, and you get that feeling. So let's sort of carry on with this. I don't know where Amy is, but I'm fine. I'm managing, man. It's good. It's one of those moments. Do you know what? I'm used to talking to myself. Do you know what? Sometimes I actually hear voices in my head. It's great. And do you know what? When I get those voices in my head, I always say to the voice, you know, it's good I'm not a schizophrenic, because the voice in my head says that he's got a schizophrenic brother that talks to himself and he's worried. So I'm so happy that I don't have his problem. So this bridge itself is the wonderful dipping bridge at Merthyr Mawr. And I'm always reminded of lots of stories. This bridge, right? We used to have our original walks when we were doing Merthyr Mawr in 2000 and 2016. We're always reminded of whenever we took groups of people, we either lost some of them, some were nearly killed on the road by cars driving fast. We had people arguing. So we stopped doing this walk because it sort of attracted all the negative energy. Anyway, that's the River Ogmore there, and it's a rather thin bridge. It's a dipping bridge. There's little holes in it, and it said that apparently you would chuck the sheep into the water to dip them in the river, but I don't think that's what they did. So what we're looking at an image of the New Inn, actually. And I'll show you where the New Inn is now in a moment. And I'm just going to read quickly out of Alan Morgan's book, The Inn of Fear. And it was, I always forget when this was published. It was published about 1980. Yeah, it's first published in 1980, and it's been reprinted several times. It goes, according to historical evidence, Cap Koch was a mass murderer who paid for his crimes with a hangman's rope on Stalling Down. Well, Stalling Down is actually St. Hilary, but it's in the same area anyway. It's the other side of Cowbridge, the eastern side of Cowbridge. But legend has it that he lived to a great age, his crimes undetected until after his death. Now, it's likely that there was more than one Cap Koch, because one of the Cap Kochs that we're talking about was in his late 80s, in the 1820s. And somebody was hung at Stalling Down, St. Hilary, in 1825 for nicking a sheep. Now, I can't imagine a 95-year-old nicking a sheep. But then again, if he's in my family, my granddad was still rustling horses in his 90s. So there you go. It is against this conflicting background that the following story has been written, with a possible explanation for the anomaly. In the understandable absence of detailed information about the macabre events at the New Inn, I have of necessity had to invent characters and situations. Now, this is rather interesting because John mentioned this to me a week ago, I think, that there's very little detail about the New Inn out there, but if you look under a couple of stones, you can find it. But I have tried to keep to the main well-known facts, at least up to the arrangement at Cowbridge. After that, conjecture has to take precedent, as it has in local folklore, even to this day. Also, as with all historical novels that extend over a lengthy period, condensation over the time element was unavailable to make the narrative readable. Other than that, like Cap Koch, I admit to nothing. It's rather interesting, but there's something in here that I hadn't actually realized. It mentions Sir John Nichol. Sir John Nichol, by about 1810, was resident at Merthyr Mawr House. And the Nichols family owned the building of the New Inn. And I've always said and maintained to this day that the Nichol family was involved in the murder alongside Cap Koch of many hundreds, if not thousands, of people who stayed at the New Inn. So there you go. We no real idea what the New Inn looked like. We know that it was in a ruinous state by about 1850. And the reason why the New Inn itself falls from grace is not because they found out that people were being murdered associated with the New Inn. It fell from grace because the road of the New Inn moved further north, where there was a new road built and people stopped using this route. They stopped using this route because people had a habit of disappearing. Anyway, so if you want to know where this is, if we move on a bit further forward and we sort of have another plan, which I know there's a silly woman going to start to moan Ellen that she doesn't know where she is. So let's just put the maps up here. Sorry, Ellen, I do love you to bits. So what we've got the dipping bridge that we've seen. You've got the A48. This road leads to Porthcawl, and it also leads to Bridgend. Over by here is Ogmore Castle. Over here is the sea. Up here is Porthcawl, and this itself is the Ogmore River, and there is the dipping bridge, and that is New Inn Road, and actually there is where we find the New Inn itself. Oh, actually, I need to redo that little arrow a minute because I've gone too far. Let's rub that one out. Let's rub in. So we go back in there. The New Inn is actually by hither. It's a little bit set further away from the river because it's a bit. So when you actually go there along the road, you sort of come off UNE and you head towards Merthyr Mawr. Instead of going down to the village this way, no, I've gone. Oh God, I've gone all over the place. A minute, hang on. Let's just redo this a minute. Hang on. Let's rub that one out a minute. Okay, there you go. Yeah, instead of going directly to the village, which is down here, what you need to do, you need to keep going. And then you come across the dipping bridge. Don't go at speed, John. And that's where we go to. Go directly over the river Ogmore. So instead of heading left towards Merthyr Mawr, you can keep going down the New Inn Road, and you actually get to some humps and bumps past the dipping bridge, and that's the New Inn on the left. And if we go back to that image, and that's where we're going to go. Hang on a minute, everything's gone to pot. So here we go. I've put you at the bottom. If we go, there it is. There's our New Inn again. I know we've seen that one. And anyone again wants to find this place, it's there. Now I'm going to give you all a word of warning, and the word of warning is only going to be given to you once. Don't park your car on this side of the river. Always park your car on this side of the river, because if you do park it on the opposite side, you'll probably end up having it clamped, because they do not want people wandering around the remains of the New Inn. The other thing as well is try to avoid going over this bridge, because people come at this bridge at such a speed that they don't see you coming over from the other side. So that's another word of warning. In fact, don't bother going to find the New Inn at all. And I'll tell you one good reason why. One of my walks, it was one of those nights, and we thought, right, it's going to be good for me to actually tell the story of the New Inn over by hither with a group of people. And we were being filmed at the same time by the owners of Merthyr Mawr House. But anyway, after that story, my steward that day said, let's go over the bridge and go to the other side, and actually stand on this side and actually look over, because it was a really nice evening. And I said, we're not going to do that. And my steward said, why aren't we going to do that? And I said, we're not going to do it. I got a bad feeling about this. I said, I got a really bad feeling about it. And he said, oh, okay, no, I'll believe you. So anyway, took 20 odd people over here, right? And no sooner had got to the other side of the road, right? It's no word of a lie. A car came at tremendous speed over the dipping bridge. Another car came from this direction. And you can imagine if we had had 20 people at that moment on that bridge, which we would have had, I'm sure 10 of them would be dead. And at that point, we never ever did a walk to the New Inn ever again, because it was just, there was something telling us not to be there. It's a really evil landscape. And, you know, we don't have a, very aware of time at this minute, but one thing that I would say, that the subtext with the New Inn is that around 1800, what would happen, peddlers would head towards the New Inn and they would stay the night. And if they were fairly wealthy and they had lots of things that the owner of the New Inn would like, i.e. Cap Cock and his merry band, they would get rid of the individual and they would chuck the body in the river. So the body would hopefully flow out to sea. But unfortunately, lots of times the bodies would actually flow back up the River Ogmore. And when the Nichols took over the estate by about 1806, it's said that the Nichols come up with another plan. And the other plan was to actually bury the bodies in the local fields, right? Now, this is where the story comes in interesting, right? So when the new inn closes by about 1830, 1835, and talk about the hanging and all the rest of it, before the 1900s, the new inn was properly demolished. And as they went into the basements of the new inn, before they demolished it, they started to find bodies. And this is where the strange bit of the story comes in, right? They started digging in the garden. Now, if you're a builder, you don't dig in the garden. You demolish the building and that's it. And they actually started to find more bodies. And then the people demolishing the new inn started to dig in some of the local fields. The local fields up here, which is far away from the new inn itself. And then they were finding, I think there was references to hundreds of bodies being found in the local fields. The answer is, no, the question is, why were the builders looking in the fields in the first place? And if they were working in those fields, they must have been digging there for a reason. Therefore, they must have been told that the bodies were there, indicating that the people who told them that the bodies were there were linked to the original murderers of those people in the first place. Vis-a-vis, we then figured out that most of those people living in Merthyr Mawr, whose generations go back some time, were involved in the murder of thousands of people in connection with the new inn. And I will say this as well. What I usually say about the coastline is the reason why people in Dunraven and Southern Down and St. Donat's and as far and southeasterly direction as Llanfair Major and seemingly very, very wealthy is because they were involved in the trade of wrecking, but particularly the people in the Merthyr Mawr area were not only involved in wrecking, they were involved in the active murder of people. This is why people in the area are so incredibly wealthy. And you go into some people's houses. I know a couple of references. I've been into one house in Southern where there's lots of shipwrecked timbers. You can't become that rich selling grain. You must have been involved in something else. The aristocracy and most of the local population were active murderers. And I tell you that, I actually said that when we were having, I stood on top of this mound here as we went down to the new inn. And I said, the Nichols family, it's a family of murderers. And somebody nudged me in the ribs and say, do you know that person on the register? This person's a Nichols. And I thought, oh shit, what have I just said? And then this woman, brazen as she was, she pushed her way forward in the group and she said, I'm a Nichols. And thank you. I've always known my family were murderers. And I'm glad somebody's actually finally told me that. And I was actually really pleased with that. I think she could have knocked my block off otherwise. But anyway, so the one thing I want to sort of say is that I've always liked to paint this as a very dark landscape, and I tell you what, we've had more haunted vigils within this landscape, and we've detected more things than anywhere in the Vale of Glamorgan. So what you do down in that direction is towards the church. So you go over a stile and you follow all the way down here, and you sort of go down the road, and then you sort of head this way, and then you get to the new inn, right? And then over here is Merthyr Mawr House, and I've mentioned this before. Around there is the chapel. That's the Chapel of St Roch. St Roch was the patron saint of death, graves, and plague. And strangely enough, the Nichols built a church there, brought masonry from other places to, in about 1810, they were saying, oh, look, we've got a major location on the pilgrimage route. Come to us. And you can guarantee that pilgrims have usually got loads of money. And lots of pilgrims disappeared as well. Sounding cynical. So, you know, this is very... oh, and also the Chasm of Doom. There's a huge chasm at the back here, which is 100 feet in depth. And when the chasm, in the tunnels in the chasm were being examined in the 1800s, lo and behold, they found lots of artifacts dating from the time of Cap Cork. It's believed that the cavern itself was used to hide items that had been stolen of people who had just freshly been murdered. So clear all that. Let's go on. So are we sounding loud and clear, Gillian? Stick your finger up in the air. What? I'm not sounding loud and clear. Gillian, I'm gonna unmute you, Gillian, because I'm feeling all alone.
You're breaking up.
Yeah, you keep breaking up, Carl. You're half and half.
Right. Okay.
And Amy occasionally disappears.
Well, the good thing is, John. Right. The good thing is, if everyone could mute themselves again, the good thing that this is recorded anyway. So hopefully you're getting a little bit. You stay with me now, Gillian, because I'm getting a bit scared. So anyway, so we're moving on, and you can imagine that the New Inn by about the 1870s, 1880s was looking a little bit like this. It was a little bit smaller than this, but you can imagine with such a perilous building with so many hauntings that the building itself was naturally removed, and obviously before they demolished it, they were finding all those bodies. Oh yes. So the hanging tree, I like this one. Are you coming to the tree, wear a necklace or rope side by side with me? So you can imagine that when we think about Cap Cork and being hung, you know, at Stolingdown, St. Hilary, I think because they never found any evidence, they needed a scapegoat, so they hung somebody. But it's unlikely it was Cap Cork himself. But that's actually in the records. Somebody of that name was actually hung from St. Hilary, Stolingdown in 1825. So actually, do you know what I'd like to do now? Something else. Do you know when we started doing these walks, one of the things that we noticed was that as we went over the brow of the hill from the village and we went up to the top of the hill and we went back down again, one of the intriguing things was as we were walking down this way to get to the New Inn and then sort of to the site of the New Inn, strangely enough, about here, you would see a weird building sticking out as a sort of the top part of a gabled wall. And we thought that's really strange because what is that building? Because interesting enough, up until 2006, there was actually a care home where the cross is on the map, and the care home that we're talking about is here, and now it's absolutely gutted. You know, after 14 years, there's really nothing left of it. But if you look at this map, there's another building behind, and that's an interesting building. And we did a little bit of research on that, and we only found one reference to it being a mental hospital, a lunatic asylum. And if we sort of zoom in on it again, that building there, just below the A48, that building there is an asylum, and it's one of probably up to 20 asylums that were built in and around Bridgend in the medieval period. Bridgend was the place to go if you had problems with your head, and it's quite scary that some of these asylums of not being properly broadcast where they were. And if you ever get an opportunity to see this building before they demolish it, there's these wonderful Georgian flat arches. Basically, a Georgian flat arch is something that lightly curves and is slightly flat. And it's a very, very strange thing indeed. And yes, it's the same type of architecture as lots of asylums around Bridgend that we can see from photographs. We've only found one reference to this being an asylum. And it's quite strange when you think about that so much out there is unrecorded, and that's sort of unrecorded and lost in memory in the past 150 years. So what I'd like to do now is I would like to sort of go somewhere else, and I would like to. If we've got time, I'll read out about my black shuck. And I've got a bit of feedback coming into my ears, so I'm going to cut your mic. It's not Gillian. Amy, can you? Oh, it was Amy. There's a bit of feedback in my ears, so I'm hopefully still with Gillian. Where we're going to go next? What I wanted to do is I wanted to do a little bit more of a seaward theme. So, if we, and this is quite relevant actually. Running down here, there's something known as the Nosh Sons, and if you're unlucky to be sailing down here, if you sail down the Nosh Gutter, you avoid the Nosh Sons and you manage to get out, and eventually you manage to get in open water. It's the way to sail if you're in excessive stormy seas, and you avoid the sandbank on the southerly side. And you avoid some of the waves, which would mean you would crash against the rocks along the coastline. Anyway, that all said, I'd like just to read this out to you, because at this present moment, we're actually close on publishing a book, which is called The Frolic Packet Steamer Disaster, March the 17th, 1831. It's called No Survivors, No Witnesses, Just Aftermath. And this is really very relevant. Up and between 1453 and 1831, not a single person survived any of these wrecks along the South Wales coastline. After 1831, after building 2 lighthouses at Nash Point, people strangely started to survive. We're not saying that the Frolic paddle steamer was deliberately wrecked, but I've got a hunch. This is a press article printed in 1831, Dreadful Shipwreck, Loss of the Frolic Steamer. We have the melancholy task this week of recording the loss of the above packet on a passage from Haverfordwest to this port, Bristol, on Wednesday night last, when every soul on board perished. The scene of this most distressing event was the Nosh Sons on the Glamorganshire coast, a short distance from Cowbridge. She was of large size, of 80 horsepower, commanded by Captain Jenkins, a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and had a full complement of crew, so that the accident must be ascribed to the dark, dirty, and tempestuous weather which blew at the time. Passengers from Milford, Tenby, and the surrounding countryside usually came by the Frolic, and we are sorry to say that she had a greater number of passengers by this trip than usual. It is impossible to state accurately how many people were on board, and there are very contradictory reports in circulation. We think that the rate of numbers on board the vessel was about 80, but this includes crew. But we are glad to say that the Steam Packet Company, who ought to possess the best information, think that the number to be much overrated, and it's a lot less than that. So there was an upside. Amongst those who had been ascertained to have perished, a senior general in the army, a General MacLeod, Colonel Gordon, Major Boyd, and various other individuals of high standing. The body of the captain was picked up on Friday and brought to Bristol. 16 other bodies, including that of a woman with a child in her arms and Miss Anderson, have been already washed ashore. The captain was found lashed to the rigging, and his watch had stopped at a few minutes before 4, about which time it is supposed the accident happened. From the circumstance of the captain being lashed to the rigging, it has been thought that he must have existed some time after the vessel struck, but nautical men are of opinion that she must have gone over almost instantly after taking the sands. A very great sensation was felt in this city on the first announcement of the event, and numerous and anxious inquiries have been daily made on the arrival of the Welsh mail for the names of the unfortunate individuals who have perished. But from the circumstances of many people going on board from various places who do not give their names, it is impossible to state either names or numbers accurately, as not one individual survives to tell the melancholy tale of the disaster. I thought I'd make you all depressed with that. So as we carry on, and as I've said and been saying most of the past 50 minutes, that this is quite a treacherous coastline, all the way up and down, past the Nosh Sons, all the way down, very treacherous coastline. And along that stretch, 5 ships at least being wrecked every single year from 1453 onwards. Not a single person is known to have survived any of those wrecks. That's another story, though. That's a more fitting story for another night. So these 2 lighthouses were operational by 1832, because the tragedy of this one wreck and losing senior officers in the army meant that Parliament was petitioned to construct lighthouses at Nash Point, and the coastline does whip up like that, and on the opposite side of these 2 lighthouses, there is a hill fort, and it's possible that hill fort in the next 10 years will be completely lost and eroded into the sea. I would not go up to the top of that, because it could give way anytime. This is what the Nosh Sons looks like on a nice calm day. And this is where we're going to go, and we might have a little bit of time to tell my story about the Black Shook. I do believe that comes at the end, actually. I've got the images in the right way. This is known as the Tusker Rock, and the Tusker Rock itself could be classed as 500 meters in length, depending on who you ask. And the Tusker Rock itself is the site of a graveyard of many, many ships throughout the ages. What would usually happen is that this is not so more in recent times, but in times before the 1800s, that ships would, hang on, if I rub that one out a minute, I want to get rid of that. What would happen is that ships would be drawn towards seeing lights on the headland at Ogmore, lights further towards Porthcawl, lights off the headland of Dunraven, lights further down at Nash Point. You can see at regular intervals. And what would happen is there would be a wrecker lord. And if anyone's ever heard of the wrecker lords of Dunraven, that's not a myth. There would be wrecker lords. And I've divided it into 2 sections. Not 2 sections, 5 sections. The wrecker lords associated with the likes of Merthyr Mawr House and Candlestand are responsible for this section. The Dunraven lords associated with this section. And guess who was responsible for this section? Amy, blurt out all at once. Those damnable, murderous monks. They were responsible for this section. Because along this section is the likes of Monk Nash and going all the way to Nash Point. And then further on down as well, the wrecker lords of St. Donat's. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I always bang in those murderous Lantwit Major people as well. So you've got 4, 4.5, 5 key points where ships were being wrecked, and you could only wreck one ship deliberately every year because the amount of material coming off the vessel would be quite a lot to get rid of. So if you wreck too many ships, I'm sure somebody else would get wind of it. And after all, there's rules amongst thieves. Thank you very much, folks. It's like, you don't want to be too greedy because down the road they need their ship to wreck. So just a little bit sort of more detail on this as we sort of move on. And this is actually on Tusker Rock. You'll be surprised with what you're seeing on Tusker Rock. This is all that sort of mechanical gubbins of all those shipwrecks from the likes of the 1830s onwards. But it's very likely that there's lots of material here as well from the 1800s. And under all this, there's going to be wooden paraphernalia. And I'm trying to identify 1 or 2 things. That clearly looks like the remains of a bilge pump. That looks like cladding from the front of a vessel. I can't really identify that. It looks like some kind of pumping mechanism. That's basically what's left of some kind of very large yacht or something. See, it's actually full of stuff. I tell you what, if a Scrappy went over there from Barry, he would have a field day. I wouldn't tell the Scrappies from Barry, actually, because they would be straight out there. Knowing, being from Barry myself, you can't nail anything down. So again, look at what we've got, and look at that there, lovely looking in that. You've got a nice bit of a propeller. So, and you've got so many sort of humps and bumps of metal, and you've got small looking bits of propeller here from another vessel. You've got some kind of engine room mechanism here. All these bits of wrecks tell the story I've been telling about the wrecking. And obviously after the 1830s, with the lighthouses installed, there were less and less shipwrecks, but there was still notably some ships being wrecked along the coastline. And particularly when you look at the likes of the likes of Lantwit Major, and the numbers of vessels going down around the Lantwit Major coastline, particularly coal vessels, they're going down, and lots of coal is being washed up on the coastline every year, if not cannonballs. But that's another story, isn't it, Gillian?
It is.
I can't say any more about that because that's going in a newsletter, I don't know if you read my letter to my sort of press release on it. That's the one that's going in the newsletter anyway. So anyway,
No.
what you haven't read it yet? No.
No.
All right. Right. So what we're going to do, what I would like to do is end up back to Merthyr Mawr, and if I could sort of cite you where you are. Hang on, where are we? If I go, oh, there we go. There you go. So what I'd like to do is on a last note, is work out where the hell I'm going. Yeah, I got a bit lost then, to be honest with you. Right. So there's St.Hilary's. There's the village. And they're all held still by the Merthyr Mawr estate. So they're tide cottages. That's the Ogmore River. Now, what we used to do, we used to do the walk at Merthyr Mawr Church, St. Hilary's. We used to go down here. We used to follow the footpath. We used to go all the way up here, blah, 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 blah. But eventually what we started to do, we started to get a bit more sensible, and we sort of right, oh, sod going that way. We'll just go up there. We'll, oh God, have I got a bit lost here a minute? Yeah, so we started going up this way. Oh, yeah, so we started going up this way, and we'd go all the way up the top there, and then we would come across the beech trees, right? So here we go. Oh God, I can tell you another. Right. Do you want to? We had a haunted evening once, right? This was about this time last year. We had a haunted evening, not a ghost walk, haunted evening. Now I had a girl working for us at that point called Jenny. Now, Jenny said, "Oh, I'll do the haunted evening with you." So I said, "Fine." I said, "Right, Jenny, we've got 6 cars, right? This is my car. It's blue, right? And when I finished at the church, you get everybody into the cars. Meet us all the way down by about here, and then what we'll do, we'll go with the cars up here. We'll all park there, and that's it, right?" So I said, "My car's blue, right? You wait there." Fair enough. So I got into the car with my steward. We drove down to this point, and all the cars were gone. Everyone had disappeared. Everyone had gone. And I thought, hang on, it's something not quite right here. Jenny had only gone off following a car that we didn't know where it came from nowhere. She headed the entire group all the way back to Bridgend, right? And I said, "Jenny, why did you do this?" And she said, "Oh, I followed the blue car." And I said, "There was never a blue car." And she said, "Yes, there was. We followed it." So anyway, if that's not another haunting, we don't know. So there's ghostly blue cars in the area as well. Anyway, back to my little story. This is what I want to finish now. So we go to these trees at the top. These are the beech trees. And I'm going to read this out word for word, and then we'll call it a night. So, so we don't want to go back to the sea. We drown there. That's a beech tree naturally. And if you think, we go to this wonderful painting. And I'm sure, Amy, you will know that this is the one side of the trees, and this is the other side of the trees. And you'll know it, that there's a little lane there. And around there is where I come with my little story. So anyway, there was this, we had just finished a ghost walk. It was a ghost walk and not a haunted walk. And the difference between the haunted walk, we start at 10 o'clock, we go until 2 in the morning, at which point we've had our pot noodles and we want to go home. So one night it was pitch black, we'd actually got to here. We were heading back, walking down this way, everybody in front of me. So I'll read this out from my own book. While on a ghost experience walk for Archaeology, While on a ghost experience walk for Archaeology Cymru in the early days, I led the party back from the site of the new inn, Merthyr Mawr. It was getting a little dusky. It had been an enthusiastic walk, and 2016 by far was the best of times for these activities for us. I would say it was actually last year, but that's me. We were nearly at the Beech Trees towards the northeast of the village of Merthyr Mawr after heading off the dangerous footpath from the new inn. So we're basically where that sort of arrow is now. So we'd actually got to the top there. I headed to a point halfway along the avenue. It's those beech trees. These trees remember the events in the new inn. These trees are close on 300 years old and directly along the route from the new inn, now alas, partly a footpath. So I sent my partner Michelle Harry forward to lead the group towards one of my final ghost story stopping places, which was well beyond the other red arrow, which is there. I was at the back to gather my thoughts and to retrace my steps. For some reason, the light seemed to be fading fast. I felt very uneasy, and this time there was something left behind. My inner self was saying to me that I was to look behind me as I was focusing on getting to the group. The answer was a big resounding yes, to look behind me. There was something left to check, but this was following me. I hadn't ritualistically closed the space we had been to stop the spirits following me. Ritually closing space is something I have to perform to prevent benevolent and evil spirits coming home with me, as they had done time and time before. The group was at least 50 meters in front of me along the avenue of beech trees. I stopped, felt something behind me. Was it one of the group? Don't be silly, I thought. It was now dusky and darkening rapidly. The group seemed much further away than a few meters. It wasn't cold, far from it. A comfortable uncomfortableness, if that makes sense. I turned towards the direction of the path from the new inn, swerved my whole body around to the right. Why do that? You'll only need to check it a little again, retrace a few steps. There was a reason. Look on the right. Those were my thoughts. The wall on the right, because over on that side is a wall and a hedge on this side. I've got to get back to where I was. Look into the darkening gloom. There it is, an aberration heading into the beech trees, now on the left. It's black, not that big, not a shook, but 4 legs, and it is coming at me, a dog of some kind. Nobody is around at that moment, and I could be in the darkest forest for all I knew. It slowly moves across the road and on a mission. I don't understand what is happening. It came from the face of the wall on the right. I moreover don't understand what is happening because it is a ghost, right? I had told people about black shooks before, big wild dogs, but didn't or wouldn't believe it. Now there is the evidence. Now I start to freak out inside. This is real! As the creature disappears onto the other side of the road, I scream out and begin to bloody run towards the group. I have just seen a black dog, I'm shouting. I have just seen a black dog. The group then stop. They are all in a row and turn around and look towards me. This black dog is no longer behind me. Any ghost would be frightened off by this nutty man dressed in a Dickensian outfit with a top hat on. From that moment onwards, with this evidence, I was convinced ghosts do in fact exist. The group looked and looked. 1 or 2 imagined there were things there, but no black animal was anywhere to be seen. Since then, we have been back to have an all-night vigil. Other new inn walks have occurred, but for want of reason, for over a year, we hadn't been back. And then 2 walks in a row in 2018. Not just me, but everyone on those walks saw a ghost, and more sightings and feelings in that lane. Overall, the sense of place, the focus of activity, and the evil at the avenue of the beech trees, and not a place of good things. And then at that point, we will just look at a black dog and we will call it a day. And they're looking up at one of these beech trees. Look at it. Ooh, magical. 200 years old. 300 years old. And you know what? I can't find my black dog, but you all know what a skinny black dog looks like. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop the screen sharing at this point. And I'm going to ask if there are any questions, and they've got to be relevant to the lecture tonight, please, because I need a little lie down because I'm knackered. These ghost walkie talks do wear you out. Right, Gillian, would you like to say anything, darling?
Yes, we used to go every year to Merthyr Mawr with our Sunday school wits and treat.
Yeah, best of luck, love. But you didn't see any black dogs?
No, we didn't see any black dogs, but we used to go in the back of a furniture van.
I'm moving on. Right, Ellen, what the hell was that about? Anyway, Ellen, a furniture van? Strange woman.
Right.
Good.
3 things. The new inn used to be on the stagecoach route from London across to Wales.
Correct.
And they used to stop at the new inn. So quite a lot of rich traders and wealthy men used to stop there and get murdered.
And women?
There's a book called Shipwrecks of the Bristol Channel, and that includes a chapter on the Frolic.
By George Harris.
It was a clipper.
That's
and I
right.
think there were 69 people on aboard. And there's a restaurant at the top of the Southern Down Hill, opposite Golden Cups, named the Frolic.
Well, actually, there's 2 points. The new book by Brian Ketch, who's written a book. I've got a draft in front of me, but there it is. So there's a new book coming out, and the strange thing is, he tells me, with all his research, that even though there's that place near the Cups called the Frolic, is not actually named after the Frolic shipwreck.
Yes, it is, because I know the owners, and they've got a plaque on the wall, or had a plaque on the wall for it.
Apparently, this expert says it's not, and this is the man who knows what he's talking about.
Because I know the owners who set it up.
Apparently, he says it's not. Anyway, I'm not going to argue that one. Go on.
Rock, my mum, after the war, my mum as a child and her brother and my grandpa moved to Craigrioss in Ogmore. So my mum used to swim out regularly to Tusker Rock.
Was she nuts?
Yeah.
Go on. Oh, you said it all. That's amazing. Well, actually, do you know what? I've stood outside the Frolic last year saying that the Frolic in the Cups is named after the Frolic paddle steamer. But this guy says no. And do you know what, Ellen? It's you and I agreeing that we're right and he's wrong. But he's the expert, so I'm going to bow down to his wisdom.
Martin and Sandra opened up that restaurant and named it the Frolic.
Well, I'm going to go with my lectures that I've done and agree with you, but he disagrees with us. So I'm agreeing with you, but disagreeing. But because I'm going to end that one. Amy, anything you would like to say?
Yeah, two things. There's actually a book based on the New Inn, and it's about a barmaid who works at the New Inn, and she witnesses.
That's it. I got it in front of me. There it is.
That's it there. Yeah, and second thing, it's a long shot, but you said there was a basement in the New Inn. Do you think it could still be there?
What?
Yeah, there was a basement in the New Inn, and it would have been filled in with rubble. It would have been a deep basement. So they basically emptied it with any bodies, and they just caved it all in. So yeah, I don't actually believe that any of the bodies were actually removed.
It's supposed to be a tunnel from the New Inn to the sea. And that's how they brought up the contraband up the tunnel.
Bingo. Yes, exactly. So, or got rid of the contraband, one or the other, because it's a two-way thing.
They said land to it as well.
Yeah, but that's still being used by Gough and the rest of the Lantwit Major class to make their money. You can imagine Dennis. Dennis is there. He's the bloody full poncho for it. Right, John, anything you'd like to say about the lecture today?
Oh, yes, I've got a few things. You mentioned that on the sands, there were Neolithic and Mesolithic flints.
Nice, yes.
Is there any difference between the two? I wouldn't have thought so, but please enlighten me.
Right, basically, a quick lecture on this. A Mesolithic flint is... Mesolithic flints are usually... can be really quite small. So in the Mesolithic period, you've got something called microliths. They can be really small, little, sharpened pieces of flint, sharpened along one edge, and sometimes used for harpoons. But the larger tools in the Mesolithic period, you've got lots of hand axes from starting to develop in the end of the Mesolithic period. And then by the time you got to the Neolithic period, you've got all the evolved Neolithic flints. They get really ornate in the Neolithic period. So I think detail and the quality of detail is more important than in the Neolithic period. In the Mesolithic period, they're more practical. So that sort of gives you answer that question. So go on, John.
Yes, thank you very much. The other thing is the Nichol family. Why would they want to kill these people?
Because they're solicitors in London initially, and naturally, buying a big estate in Wales from another powerful family would have meant that they would have needed some kind of instant income. And seeing the point is, John, is quite simple. The New Inn is owned by the Nichols family, right? And you can imagine that the landowner who owns the New Inn would have been involved in a cut of the profits from those lives were being lost and being robbed and all the rest of it. So if I'm the new owner of the New Inn, right, I would want to be on it as well. I'm not saying I would, but if it's money, John, it's money. That's what money talks.
Yeah, and one just final thing, by the by, I think it would be interesting to see what Peter has to say about Tuscarora as well.
And actually, that's a question you can leave for Wednesday. So,
Yeah.
Kathleen, have you got your mic? Can you put your mic on, Kathleen? Because we haven't heard from you. I'm trying to unmute her. Go for it.
Okay. Well, what did I think?
Yes.
Yeah, it was. I like the shoreline things. The new way. Again, I'm not familiar with where you are,
Right.
and I'm noticing that repeatedly. In that, I don't know where you are, and so I don't know any of this landscape. So,
okay. This is why we try to put maps in there, but I'll probably explain a little bit more next week on locations. That's fair enough. Good point. That's a good point. No, that's not a problem, Kathleen.
that's okay.
So if you think with the landscape that we've been talking about, if you think about Bridgend is immediately north of Merthyr Mawr, and it's sandwiched between Ogmore by Sea and Porthcawl. And it's sort of a weird sort of sandy, duned valley. And it's sort of cut off by the A48 that sort of runs north of it. So if that paints a little bit more of the picture, then yeah.
I can imagine the landscape. Although this land I only pass on motorway, so I go through this land without ever stopping in it because I'm heading for the west. But the coastline from Swansea onwards, I'm far more familiar with.
Yeah.
Until you get to Carmarthen and Llansteffan, and then I get lost again. So I've got a little area that I know very well.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that.
It's I'm aware that the Bristol Channel was reputedly the most dangerous in the world, except for the Bernai Straits between Russia and. No, it wasn't. What do you call that gap between?
Bering Strait.
Yes, that's the one. That's the one. The Bristol Channel had so many undercurrents to it that they were just having more shipwrecks than anywhere else in the world.
And it's so easy to deliberately wreck a ship. People are so desperate to get out of the storm. So, anyway, thank you for that, Kathleen. So what I'm going to say, obviously Wednesday, we got the Archaeology and History of Cymru. We're looking at a very interesting, strange topic associated with, the lost rebellions of Cymru. So we sort of are looking into the valleys towards Swansea Way, dotted around West Wales as well. So that's what we're doing on Wednesday. The lecture next week, which will be looking at the collapse of the Incan civilization, and we've got the new live YouTube discussion broadcast that I do on a Friday for an hour. It lets me put my hair down and just sort of waffle about the week's lecture, and obviously we've got the forum on Wednesday as well, and next Saturday. So I'm gonna, if nobody else has got anything else to say, thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully you've all enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And if there's no more questions, I'm going to say good night to Jill, Ellen, Kathleen, Amy, and John, and I'll see you all very soon. Night, folks.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr i chi. Night.
Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr i chi. Croeso. Da iawn.
Good night, mine her.
Good night, guys.
Ar ben dy gyda chi.
Jambo Buana, Moriaco.
Oh, da iawn. Da iawn, John. Right, okay then. Right, I'm
Nos da.
Nos da. Nos da chi.
Da.
John's just sinking there. Anyway, Amy, anything you want to say before I go, Amy?
9.
Yes, I did my homework for Clan on the White Lady.
Ah, right, good.
I could only find 2 sentences.
Amy, you're really breaking up. Amy, look, the best thing to do, right? Can you send this to me as an email or a text? Yeah? Oh, God, I've lost you altogether. Send it to me as an email or a text, all right? And I've lost you altogether. Look, Amy, I'll see you next Saturday, all right? If you can hear me, and we'll go from there. Anyway, thank you very much for watching and listening tonight, and God bless, and everybody keep safe. Thank you.